that sound okay? Is that good?
Yes.
Sound good? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Okay. So my talk is about a topic I'm very interested in right now. I've been really focusing a lot of energy and fascination and working with other people too. So what I'm representing today is not just my own work, it's the work of my students. I have some amazing doctoral students in the CIIS department that have really worked on the same topic. Two recently just got their dissertations completed, and I'm working with other people too. So it's sort of like a group of people doing research in this area. And the research, as was just said, is about navigating and integrating experiences that are transformative, that are intense, that often show up in visual imagery, but also in kinesthetic imagery. Some people don't have visionary imagery, they have kinesthetic imagery. It's very body-oriented imagery. Sometimes it's not a vision, but the person's moving. And the more recent dissertation with Tara Sami did was the use of, the title has to do with ecstatic, spontaneous and ecstatic movement experiences during the taking of entheogens. So all kinds of ways that people can have, powerful transformative experiences. And I think for some reason the visual ones have been given maybe more, they've been privileged more for some reason, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. Perhaps it's easier to show them in paintings, that's one thing, and I will sort of do the same thing, show paintings of the visions, but I'm going to try to remember to talk about the kinesthetic, more like the energy force lines that are really, behind the imageries. Behind the images could also be felt in the body. So, first of all, the idea of learning to navigate. I mean, one of the important things in any kind of strong experience, if it's a psychotherapy experience where you're going through a change, whether it's a grieving experience, whether it's an ecstatic experience, the idea of witnessing and having wisdom as we go through an experience is very important. For instance, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the idea would be that you have some wisdom to how to navigate the realm of the bardos. It's important to be able to navigate successfully transformative experiences. In that case, going from living to dying. But it's a transition that you want to navigate, and the more wisdom and compassion we can bring to the process, the better that navigation is. And from a Tibetan perspective, it has to do with also the greater chance you have to have that transition result in awakening. So it's really important to navigate these experiences and not just be shot out of a cannon, And that's to be nice too, but the full benefit, I think, is really to witness as we experience. And then to integrate, this word integrate, what that means, I think, is that back in the waking state, we have brought back the understandings and the wisdom from the altered state. So that's also a very important part. And this image here represents to me like one of the main kind of challenges about change. Change is both kind of fascinating and somewhat foreboding. Like we're sort of thinking, well, it might be interesting to go through that doorway, but because it looks so exotic, it looks like this is a Shiva temple in Indonesia. It might be, what's there? This is the unknown. But often surrounding these portals, there's something intimidating there too. Something that shows up as a face or as a mood, just a sense of foreboding. So this is a kind of a choice point in many. I think this happens all the time in our waking life. We see somebody moving in a strange way, and we realize, I'm not quite sure I trust that person. I think I'm going to move a little bit over here. So this is operating all the time. It's not just in altered states. This idea of the unknown, and what should be our stance to the unknown. I mean, clearly, I mean, if there's a bus heading our way, we want to definitely get out of the way of the bus. So we want to be wise in what we are frightened of. So fear has its purpose, but we don't want to have irrational fear that inhibits our ability to move into the mystery. So I think this is a very, I think it's a St. Francis prayer that actually talks about the wisdom to know the difference, between what things we can change and what things we have to be with and live with. So some things, like going through this doorway, I think we need to live through that experience. So these are some of the paintings that people who have also, it's interesting that these experiences show up as faces in many people's experiences. Faces that appear to be fascinating, mysterious, but somewhat ominous too. Some of them are more or less ominous, but the guy named Otto called it numinous. Numinous means there's awe and there's dread at the same time. Experience combines both. It's paradoxical in that sense. And this, to me, if this would occur to me, I've gone to South America and explored ayahuasca as a researcher, but also in direct experience a lot. And these experiences have occurred to me quite a lot. And they're somewhat unnerving, and I realized that this is part of what I needed to navigate, these particular kinds of experiences. So I studied with different shaman in Brazil and Peru. I also do some neuroscience, so I did some recordings of people during ayahuasca sessions. And my focus is on transformational change processes. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I'm interested in change, how we develop and grow and change. And I'm studying shamanism and ayahuasca in particular because it really seems to facilitate change in a major way under the right circumstances. I'm going to, okay, a little gadget here is, okay. Now I suggest that in some ayahuasca experiences, there's sort of this pattern of these three stages. The first one, this is a painting I bought in Peru, the last time I was in Peru, last summer actually. And you can't quite see it too much, but the colors, basically it's a lot of dripping, uncomfortable, kind of Halloweenish kind of experiencing, okay? It's sort of visceral, it's sort of somewhat nauseating. The body feels that something bad could be happening to it. There's often fear. So this is quite common in the beginning of ayahuasca experiences. Even if you've done a lot of ayahuasca, this shows up again and again. And so I call this is a phase of healing and purification. You don't always have to go through this. Sometimes you can go right into this second phase, to me, is a kind of energetic, kind of creative phase where new things are happening. There's a lot of dynamism. A lot of times snakes show up and kundalini kind of experiences, and basically a lot of beautiful imagery or movement patterns in the body. It's highly creative. And I think depending on the individual, there can be kind of a celestial phase that follows that, where it looks like all that creativity can go different places, but if you have a spiritual orientation, it can go towards spiritual openings. So I think this is something I've seen in many people's journeys. And I don't think it's, my curiosity is whether it's really how widespread this phenomenon is, or maybe it's just the people I've talked to and worked with, but I have sort of a model. I'm trying to sort of see, does this hold up? And also I'm curious whether it holds up as well for women as for men. I think this might be more of a male model. I don't know. That's why I'm working with women students on this question. And sometimes it's possible to enter into these altered states in a very kind of curious, blissful way. This is an alchemical illustration. So I don't think it's necessary to have to go through sort of a hellish realm first. I think it's quite possible just to go directly into great beauty and wonder. So there's different ways to enter into this process. And the model I'm working on is based on experience. So the model it's a model, but it's really built up from qualitative research I've done and a lot of research, a lot of other types of inquiry, but very congruent with shamanism, worldwide practices of shamanism, where these kind of features, like the shamans are viewed as intermediaries between worlds. There's basically a kind of an upper, middle, and lower world. This is an illustration of this different levels of the world, and that healing is a kind of viewed as a balance, a restoration of balance toward wholeness, and that shamans are assisted by spirits and entities, guides, and helpers. This is a kind of pervasive understanding of shamanism. It also shows up in all the ayahuasca research that I've done. All the reports, all these phenomena are there too. So to me, it's part of the way I model these kind of altered states. I'm just suggesting here that this is the complicated way of saying transformative imagery narratives. They're spontaneous, they're waking, they have visual and kinesthetic components, and they're narratives, meaning that they unfold like a story. That's really interesting that they have a narrative aspect. These are like, often when you read transcripts of people's reports, they sound like a mythic story. They really have a kind of narrative structure, which I think is very interesting. And this would be an example from Pablo Amaringo, the Shipibo shaman and painter. This is one of Pablo's paintings, and you can see it has snakes, Pachamama. These are the shaman and the healers and the patient down here. And there's a celestial realm up here, right? And so reptiles tend to be underworld animals, and then we have mammals often in the middle world, and then in the upper world there's entities that are in different heavens and so forth. So this is, you could find similar iconography in Christianity and Islam and many traditions. Angels are upper world entities, and in Islam they're called jinns, and so there's a lot of similarity across cultures. There's shamanic elements in the major world religions. And these are the kind of things that are reported for shamanic experiences. Healing, knowledge, creativity, spiritual development, community cohesion, entity encounters. Again, often the beginning of the journey, sometimes it's like finding, like I like to just look at the artwork sometimes, just try to understand how to read the artwork. So, there's sort of, we're outside and we're trying to go in deeply into something, In the beginning, the journey seems to go in, having to go into enclosed space, a secret enclosed space. Like temples always have inner sanctums, right? We talk about the inner sanctum. Inside, there's a secret place, and often there's like a tunnel or a path to get there, like a labyrinth. So we come from the outside and we go in, and it gets a little bit claustrophobic. It's a secret, confined space with something very powerful inside. I think it resonates with the human body. I think we can think about this many ways, but often the experience are bodily experiences as well as visionary experiences when we're having these experiences of confined space. So I think we're re-entering our body in a new way. Think about it, we talk about being disconnected from our bodies. We live in our minds so much. So in the beginning, the first portal may be that we re-enter our body. We come in, and it's a mysterious place to us. Right? It's a mystery what our body is. It's a way to think. I'm just sort of playful. This is sort of a playful way of thinking about art. and about symbolism. The symbols, because you need to start to engage with symbols, because they're worldwide symbols that you can read as a language, but then you have your own personal symbols in your dreams. And there's not a perfect correspondence, so it's a kind of a learning of a new language to read symbols. And these experiences give us many, many symbols. You know, gestures. They might not be a visual symbol, they could be a gesture. We get this gesture all the time. I don't know what this gesture means. It's like and then we do Google image, we realize, wow, this gesture shows up over there and over there. You know, and we can actually study and understand our own inner language. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of navigation skills. We're learning to navigate this language. It's not a rational language. This is from Russian folklore. This has to do with Baba Yaga, who's like a kind of a crone, scary witch who has a house right at the edge of the community before the great forest begins. And this is a seeker who's about to go find Baba Yaga. And here she is meeting her. So she's a very scary kind of Gnostic intermediary, somewhere between the waking world, conventional world of community, and this secret world. You know, and often there's these intermediary spirits or guides that we meet, and they're ambivalent in terms of whether they're good or bad, right? We don't know. We got to figure that out. We have to, sometimes we're asked 3 questions and we have to answer correctly, or we get put in the oven, you know, stuff like that. It's scary. I don't want to end up in the oven. And I show this because I just want to play a little bit with images in the beginning here. This is the kinds of imagery that come from different civilizations that have tried to show in their sacred art some of the things that they see. So this comes from 750 to 1000, you know, after the birth of Christ. In ancient Peru, this wari culture. Now these are tunics that were found wrapped around people that were buried, and it's fascinating to me how they took a form like this, is a starting form that was on some monumental architecture in Peru. And then in the tapestries and the tunics, you can see how they morph these images in quite interesting and amazing ways. So this is a phase that I talked about earlier, this creativity phase, where we're taking forms and somehow our mind is able to display the amazing fluidity of form to our, you know, something presents itself to us, to our mind, something beyond what we could ever hope to show in art, but a capacity that's within us. And I think these individuals from ancient Peru had this enormous capacity to show this. Because I was looking for examples. What's out there that looks like my experiences? And I looked and looked, and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. That's getting close. That's getting quite close. This culture used DMT snuffs. So that could account for the way this looks. Also, entities come to many people. This, in the center is the Annunciation with Mary and Angel Gabriel. So there's an entity encounter. It's a kind of, Mary's not looking at the Angel Gabriel, she's sort of looking away, but they're sensing each other. And look at the interesting connection between their gestures. You know, they're sort of communicating sort of as if the angel's in another world, but Mary's connecting with the angel through gesture. You see the similarities with gestures? It's almost like they're talking in gestures. So she's getting this understanding through her body. Because, you know, she's being told at this moment that she's going to carry Christ, right? This Christ energy in her body. So it's a kind of communication. This is the kind of nonverbal language that can come from these experiences. So I think gesture is incredibly important. I put the hands of the two out here so you can sort of see how they're paralleling each other, right? Here we can see the expressive capacity of hands in many traditions, where gesture is used to teach, to show things that are beyond words. So this again points to me to language, the fact that this is a language. And that what we see in these experiences are this language, but we don't know how to read it, right? So part of our challenge is to learn how to read this language. How do we read this language? How do we become competent to read this language? And I think that allows us to integrate. Once we can read the language, then we can better integrate the meaning, how we use these experiences, how we express them. I think Alex Gray is one of the most amazing painters to be able to show some of these experiences, how they feel. But look at these, you see, these are not just visions, these are energetic dynamic patterns, right? He's also showing the energetics behind the image, right? So for someone with a different religious persuasion, they might see a different entity, but the energetics would be similar, right? So there's a kind of energetic process occurring, and the image that we see could have to do with our own background. So I call this enhanced vertical attunement. That's the name I gave for this. I was thinking, how can I talk about this but not have it anchored in any tradition? Sometimes, okay, it's verticality, it's energy moving up and down the spine, it's a kind of ecstatic opening, it's enhanced, attunement to these energies. So what I've done is try to build a model that's based on these experiences and that reflects some of the key stages that I see recurring again and again. And for my exploration, it could be different for other people, this journey process tends to go down in terms of purification, letting go, some fear, some sense of being challenged, wanting to control but knowing you can't, having to let go, finally being able to let go. And when you're not able to let go, it's very difficult. So almost the difficulties involved in these experiences is the inability of letting go and the panic that can create. Once there's a kind of letting go, there's a kind of, this is actually the angel Gabriel again showing up. There's a kind of, I don't know, a moment where there's kind of from a Christian point of view, it would be called grace. And then there's a kind of very creative burst of energies and perhaps building to a spiritual dimension and then a return to the world. So this is sort of like a little bit similar to Campbell's hero's journey, but it has a little slightly different too. So I can't talk a whole lot about this, but I want to just cover the key features. And how much time do I have left? Somebody's keeping track of time for me.
Yeah, 20, 25.
25 minutes?
25 minutes.
Until questions?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's talk about these. Actually, I want to pause for a moment and ask for any questions right now. I actually don't like to wait until I know I'm supposed to. Yes?
Do you have any ideas on what may determine if a person is unable to let go into getting those experiences and pieces?
Yeah, I did one study where I gave a bunch of personality tests to people. Sort of a scientific part of my approach to things. It turned out that people with kind of low ego strength and high on absorption had a hard time because they could go deeply into the experience, but they seemed to be really rattled by the experience. And I actually had these people wired up to the EEG machine at the time that they were having these difficult experiences. And I was looking at the left frontal lobe. And normally the left frontal lobe is, witnessing what's going on. And these people had a whole bunch of delta patterns in the left part of their brain. It's almost like they were dissociated. And I don't know if it had to do with fear, but there basically were not no reflective consciousness at all was going on. Okay, so if So my hunch, seeing that, and I saw it in a number of people, I really feel that if people lose their capacity for reflective consciousness, or we call witnessing, right? If you no longer can witness, then whatever happens is the total truth of reality. There's you know, it's just, you are in the midst of this death experience, right? And I think those people panicked that I work with. So I suggest, for myself at least, it's good to remind myself if I'm in this kind of ego death experience, and I've gone through a number of these kind of shamanic dismemberment experiences where you feel your body is being taken apart and things like that. When that happens, it's good to have a witness that's saying, oh, I remember this. This comes from shamanism. I could be having a shamanic dismemberment experience. I'm not really dying, you know? That's a good thought to have right there. You know, the idea of some reflective capacities in the midst of these experiences or witnessing allows you to identify where you are in the experience. And if you know that it could well be ego death related, you know that, well, the good thing to do is relax and try to let go. It's not a good thing to try to escape, because you can't, you know, really, immediately. I mean, if you're taking an entheogen, you're going to have to ride it out. So this idea that there's a reflective consciousness there with the fullness of the experience, I think bodes best for navigating. Yes.
I just am wondering if you have researched from the kinesthetic perspective,
Yes.
Sacred dance at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Spontaneous, we call it spontaneous movement.
right.
But Tara, in her dissertation, which is available now, so you can get it, it's really a great dissertation, she worked with, I think, 10 people and interviewed them about the development of their own sacred movement practices that arose after using entheogens. And they would just describe, you know, how it came to them, how they sort of co-created with entities that came into their bodies, what facilitated it for them, what made it difficult for them, the kind of things they learned. But it was the first time that I saw like a kind of a really good qualitative dissertation on this topic. I think it might be the first one on this area.
What is her name again?
Tara Samy, S-A-M-I-Y, T-A-R-A, Tara, S-A-M-I-Y, and she just finished. It should be at the library.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Where do you believe that the source of the narratives come from? Because since it's spontaneous and unlocking, you're never really be able, I mean, just out of your thought process, from a psychological perspective, but also studying shamanism and...
I mean, I'm sort of like, don't have any one perspective that's dominant, so I try to sort of have, I try to hold a whole bunch of different perspectives sort of equal weighted. I don't want one to dominate, like, I don't. So if I was going to say, look at all those perspectives, I think it appears that it's not, certainly not our ego consciousness, that's for sure. Then the next question would be, if not our ego consciousness, then perhaps some other dimension of ourself, like, you know, Jung talked about the collective unconscious. The question would be then, what's the connection between the collective unconscious and sort of the nature of being in general? Like if you think about us being a human being, but then there's all being, right? So my hunch would be, it's not just about being a human being this comes from, but it comes from the nature of being. And I can't explain that, but that's what it looks like phenomenologically. It doesn't look like it has to do with human beings per se. Right? It looks like it has to do with the nature of being. And maybe non-being, you know, too. You know, the dance between being and non-being. But it looks like a big narrative, right? It doesn't look like it doesn't look like it's specific to human beings, this narrative. So it's like a cosmic narrative. You know? It's a big narrative that somehow sometimes we can witness it. Right? So I can't do any research on that question.
Of course, yeah. No, I was just interested in your perspective on that, yeah.
But sure wish I knew more about it. It'd be really great. Really great. Yes.
The patterns and models that you're describing, Do you think they apply any less to chemical agents like LSD, or do you find them comparable, or is there more of a...
Well, when I was young, I did a lot of LSD, but it was a while ago, so I don't know what it would be like now if I did LSD now. It could be just like ayahuasca, I don't know. But I feel that ayahuasca has this entity encounter thing going on more so than other psychedelics. That might be have to do with DMT. It might have to do with the alkaloids that are in the MAO inhibitors. But entity encounters are not so prominent in psilocybin and mescaline and LSD. So that's a kind of a profile. So I think there's profiles. For instance, one of the things I've noticed, have you ever noticed where, like, psilocybin mushrooms, it's like, it alters the surface of perception. In other words, if I can say looking at trees, right, or plants, living things, they start to see that there's intense animation in the surface layer of the, in other words, it's actually changing your perception of the surface layer of the living object of the plant, right? It's starting to undulate. And with ayahuasca, that doesn't happen. You see something transposed upon the surface layer. You see energy lines around the surface layer, but you don't see a morphing of the surface layer perceptually. Why is that? So there's something that's really interesting. So I think if you look really carefully at these experiences, there are some really interesting differences. And obviously psilocybin has been used as a sacrament for thousands of years, probably. So it looks like each one maybe is tapping into something somewhat different. But I just scratching the surface to know that they're different, right? Yeah. So maybe I go, oh yeah, one more question.
I'm curious about your comparative to ibogaine
Yes.
and ayahuasca and psilocybin.
Well, I don't have any direct experience with ibogaine, so I only can talk from talking to people that have had experience. And I can't answer the question really. I don't like to talk about things I haven't directly experienced. It's sort of like, you know, you should ask somebody who's expert in ibogaine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me continue. So the reason I created this model was because I was struggling with my own experiences. They were overpowering, they were amazing, but they were difficult to integrate. I wanted to integrate these experiences, but they were so otherworldly. They were so like disconnected with everything I knew. I started this work in 2000, so I've been working on this for 12 years. They were so hard to integrate, especially the encounters with other beings. I mean, I thought, what is this? How do I make it? I didn't even, it wasn't like making sense of it. I just wanted to, it was starting to sort of alter my worldview in somewhat precarious ways. It was like you have entity encounters, sometimes you still connect with them in the waking state. You know, it's like, so it was more like getting my stability, getting a worldview that could accommodate this range of experience. So it took a while. And what helped a lot was just realizing how pervasive these experiences are in other cultures. The cultures that have nothing to do with the use of entheogens too. You know, how pervasive the experience of human beings making contact with subtle energy entities with no bodies. Right? That process is all over in world history, in all eras, in all times, in the great religions, in the less large religions, in shamanism. So it's everywhere. So that sort of helped me feel, well, okay, this is a real phenomena. This really exists. But the fact that it was such a kind of a where you start to get things coming into your mind that you really feels more real than this reality, it's still quite difficult to have any kind of coherent sense of it all, right? And I didn't really want to try to figure it out. I just wanted to have more coherence, so I could navigate myself these experiences better too. So that's the motivation behind this. So I did it for myself. And now I'm trying to get you to agree with me. No. Anyhow, if you're interested in what I'm working on, I have 2 publications that you can download from my website. And one's like a 65-page chapter that details all my research in ayahuasca, and includes a lot of imagery. And it's just frankechenhofer.com. And there's going to be a pull-down menu, and you just click where it says research, and then it's password protected, and the word is collaboration. And I have to password protect it because I'm not really allowed to just freely, give away things. But if I'm working with you in some informal way, it's okay. So the details of what I'm going to say are really in this chapter. And if you email me, my email is at CIIS, fechenhofer@ciis.edu. I'll also email you too, so that's another way to communicate. So this is the model, and each of the 9 stages, I've given it language. I realized the need for new language. When you have new experiences, you need new language if you want to talk about them to other people. So I tried to create language for these different stages. What's some of the basic energetic features of the stage? And so the first stage that I work with for myself is this stage that's sort of like where you're in a standstill kind of a situation. Or you have an intention to know more about something you are blocked about knowing, right? A lot of times our intention in the beginning is because we want to move from a place of stuckness to a place of greater understanding or openness. So often there is a kind of a question that implies a standstill situation. And many shamans and many people that work with entheogens talk about the importance of intention. So having an intention sort of has an impact on what's going to happen in your experience. But there's a certain kind of energy that goes with this situation. I call it enhanced conflicting energy. It means it's like a koan that we can't answer. Something's gnawing at us, something's important, and yet we can't understand it. And there's somewhat of a struggle, and there's somewhat of a kind of a polarizing of 2 energies, and we're going back and forth, and there's a feeling that's in the body that we have. It's not. This is a picture of a feeling in the body, and this could be shown in different ways. This is an alchemist, a phase called the Negrito phase, in alchemy, the blackness. And it's also interesting that the alchemists love to use all kinds of symbolism, so they have fire and they have wind, and they have these 2 little entities that are up there too. Sort of 2 entities, maybe that need to talk to each other. So I love alchemy because you can read anything into it. So in order for me, a change process would be to move from this place to a more of a kind of a movement toward that which we want to know or experience or be. And for me, that means we have to actually tolerate things that are worse. Because here, there's a kind of a vague frustration with not knowing. But if we actually sink into our body, if we allow ourselves to really feel what we're feeling, it intensifies the experience. So from vague frustration, we go to more acute frustration. Okay? Now, I don't think it has to be always like this, but for me, it sort of is always like this. So I think for other people, they just probably can go right from here to just right to grace. You know, they just go right from here right to grace. But that's not me. Even if sometimes this is easy to do and I do it quickly, there's always this phase. You know, sometimes I can go through it quickly. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes I'll spend a whole session just going down. So the duration I spend a little different, but it's always these stages are seen to be there for me. So I often notice that I'm frightened. So now I think, well, that's part of the territory for me. I expect fear. I expect to feel intimidated by this experience. I'm opening to the mystery in myself. My reaction, my regular reaction, is feeling intimidated and frightened. So I've accepted it. I've accepted this as normal. But other people could be very different. I've done some experiences with collaborative work with women. They sometimes go from the normal state into kind of a ferocity in the very beginning. And I've seen it enough to realize that I never do that. I will never have it. I've never had that experience. But with several women, I've noticed this is true for them on multiple occasions. So I'm really thinking they're probably different narratives, right? And my hunch is that there's a gender difference here. But no one's done that research yet. So that would be wonderful research to look at. The gender differences in this narrative. So the key word here is tolerating. And it only feels overwhelming. So the navigation skill here is, it feels overwhelming, but check in with your body. Oh, my body's actually okay. But in my mind, it feels overwhelming. So there's going to be this discontinuity between how the mind feels about what it's experiencing and how the body is actually doing. Often there's, it's very interesting to notice that you're still breathing. Nothing's that wrong with my body, but my mind is like, ooh, right? So this is a kind of a skill, a remembering to notice the body. How is my body? Even though my mind feels it's intolerable, but this experience is intolerable for me, and I want to get away from it. You check in with your body, you realize my body's okay. It's not then intolerable, but it feels intolerable. It has and the reason it's intolerable, this is my hunch, I think it feels intolerable because this goes often back to early times where we had some trauma around this, and that's when it felt intolerable. When we were little, maybe as a child, this type of experience, it did feel intolerable. And so when we go back again, it has this veneer of being intolerable, but it's really not intolerable. With an adult mind witnessing this, we can be with the experience that it's intolerable, but we can also relax with it too. So this is a time for relaxation, even though it's, yes, 5 minutes, okay. So if we are able to be with this sense of overwhelming experience and allow ourselves to dismantle, we go through an ego death experience. It doesn't sound nice, this ego death thing. But it's not the body's death. And it's not a permanent ego death. I mean, it would be great if it actually was a permanent ego death. Unfortunately, the ego doesn't really want to die. It just temporarily sort of lets go. So if the ego temporarily lets go, there's and this is a kind of a dismantling of self-schema. The shamans talk about dismemberment at this phase. Here in the alchemical slide, this wolf is eating the old king. The old king is getting eaten up. But you see in the background, there's a new king that's arising from the ashes. Okay? So this is a transition phase, this phase of ego death. I think a lot of people just sort of bear it and just sort of just try to hope this goes away, and then they get into the good stuff with their entheogenic experience. But if you really look at this phase, I think this stuff might be there. And I think it's worth looking at. It's worth trying to be lucid during this very difficult time. And then after the ego death, I think what spontaneously happens is what I'm calling enhanced inner attunement, when there's a kind of a sense of love. Like this is the touch, this is like you know, it's all like the song Amazing Grace actually describes this experience the best, where someone who felt that they were forlorn and unredeemable, in that moment of greatest darkness, there's this touch of grace. You know, that's this healing aspect that comes spontaneously, you know, uncalled for. And then I think that triggers a creative process, which like first phase I call enhanced form fluidity, where just the amazing nature of form is elaborated and explored in all its innumerable ways. Great beauty, great fascination. It's like being's fascination with form. You know, like being loves form. Being loves to, you know, like evolution likes to make a lot of forms, right? It's always like generating more forms. You can't get enough forms. Every place is a little niche, some little dark, weird kind of arsenic kind of geyser somewhere. This little form's being created there. Like, wow, it's like totally out of control with wanting to create new forms. And so after this kind of what I call enhanced form fluidity, I think there's a kind of a process that I didn't know what to call it, but it's enhanced compressed complexity, where forms are kind of compressed and you get symbolism. You get layered forms that have multiple meanings and multiple layers. And you can see it visually sometimes with the layering of reality. You'll see one layer, and on top of it's another layer, and they're all shifting, and there's correspondences. Some kind of a very complicated compression of meaning and into forms. And I think sacred art does this. Sacred art, that's what sacred art is, I think, is this compression of meaning into forms. You know, captures these nonverbal understandings. And then I think after this process, for the people I've talked to, there's a kind of a process where there's a kind of an organization. I always think about this at Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you know, before the big mothership was going to land, that they were sort of like preparing the little flight place, and they got everything lined up right, they're just waiting for the mothership to come down, and, you know, all the little music. This is sort of like, to me, that's what this represents. So everything is getting, it's like the landing pad, getting, you know, and the mothership's going to land right in the center of the landing pad, you know, and that's where the two deities are, right in the center of the landing pad, you know, and they're just waiting for it to come down. And what comes down, I think, is this. This is a very cool image also from Peru. It's called the Romandi Stella. And these were visions that were probably facilitated by mescaline, because this culture really used mescaline as a sacred plant medicine. And this was a major deity for this culture. But the interesting thing to see is the verticality of it, right? It really talks about enormous verticality, enormous power, enormous aliveness. And so I call it enhanced vertical attunement. And these are sometimes portrayed as, San Pedro cactuses, you know, on the side, two big San Pedro cactuses and other iconography. And this is seen in many other types of cultures. You'll see these stacked heads, you know, you see stacked heads in Hinduism and stacked heads in Buddhism, all this verticality, you know, and all the chakra drawings. Same thing, all the Alex Gray painting we looked at before. And then finally, the last stage I have here is the coming back to sort of the real world here. This would be the purpose of a spiritual teacher, where you want to communicate to others what you learned, because this is natural desire. Like, this is so awesome, you just want to share it the best you can. So I call that enhanced horizontal attunement. You're really trying to develop an attuned understanding of how to communicate this to other people. How does this go out to others? How do I take this stuff that's ineffable and be able to share it with other people? How is it possible to do that? And that's, Tara has all these arms, you know, it's sort of like she's skillful. She's got 1,000 arms. Each arm can talk to another person or give a gesture or something. You know, it's like she's multitasking. She can really do a lot of communicating with so many arms. And she still has all the kind of vertical alignment too to the source, as well as all this ability to communicate. So it's a kind of a symbol of that. And so I'm going to teach an elective in the spring on this topic. this little advertising for my elective. And it's going to be sort of like filling in all the gaps. And also I want to teach methods in the class, so half the class is going to be kind of hands-on methods to learn navigation skills and some art, using artwork. I'm going to work with a woman who just got her MFA from CIIS. Her name is Francesca Alexander, and she and I are going to teach this. But she's going to really help me with the artistic aspect of this class. So that's all for my slides. And we still have some time for questions, right?
Yep.
Yes.
I have very distinct experiences.
Please use this over.
Yeah, as a teenager, I had very distinct experiences of magnetic fluid coming into my room and coming in on me in a maniacal way, or people floating up in the corner.
Yeah.
Well, what is your belief about being able to differentiate between actual external entities versus us entering into like a dream world where dream characters are very real, but now we're in an altered state?
Yeah.
How do you really put your finger on reality in this case? What is validity of an external?
You know, it's a great question, and I can just share some of my own understandings from my own experiences and talking to others. So it's just like it's a small subset of experience, but definitely there's kind of entity encounters that are not pleasant. You know, and where entities sort of come into your mind like they want to take over, right? And in the beginning of my own experiences, I have a background in Buddhism and Sufism, Tibetan Buddhism and Sufism. So I really want to love everybody, you know, including entities from other worlds. So my first approach was compassion. You know, I thought, oh, okay, if this entity just wants to explore my mind, I'll just open my mind and let it in. Turned out, wow, that's not a good idea. So over time, I sort of realized I developed this interview technique with entities. You know, I would keep them at a distance, and you know how you do that is another question. But basically, I used some of the techniques from Tibetan Buddhism that I had learned to create some, like a sacred space that has a boundary and so forth. Like a mandala has a sacred space, there's fire around the mandala, so you can sort of, over time, you can keep these visitors at the edge of this boundary, and you sort of, they're there. And you interview them. You talk about what their intentions are. You know, you talk about what your intentions are. And then it's like making a friend or anybody that you would. It's sort of like just you and me like talking, right? It's like, I don't know who you are. Tell me more about yourself, right? It's like there's a kind of getting to know, what is this about? What is this encounter about, and what is it for? And then you again have a chance to express your intention. Why are you doing what you're doing during this experience, right? And you can see whether or not the entity that's coming is part of your narrative, or they're just sort of like showing up because and your mind is more open, right? It could be your mind opens and a lot of things show up, right? And then some of them could be like the equivalent of viruses and bacteria, right? So you need to be selective. Just think about it. You have this huge array of phenomena. Where do you focus your mind? What is valuable to? What direction do you go? How do you make those decisions? If you have a choice, if you do have choice, like if you're walking in the woods, you have a choice. You say, "Wow, it looks kind of nice over there. I'm going to head off this way." Right? I mean, at some point in these experiences, you develop choice. And once you have choice, then you get to decide where you want to go. But then you also have to discriminate. How do I know where to go? Right? So it's sort of the same as like walking in the woods. You know, first time you go, it's all a big kind of, you're not sure. But over time, you start to learn how to navigate in the woods. And it's the same thing with the inner experience. You know, and it unfolds slowly. You know, it unfolds slowly over time. Okay? Yes.
I was intrigued by your reference to being our stuckness,
Yes.
various issues, small and large.
Yeah.
And some of them take years, they stay with us. And
Yeah.
we're kind of our throttle can't move us forward or backward. Do you find the journey with ayahuasca and maybe even mushrooms particularly helpful in dislodging a little bit of that stuckness, or is it going to again vary with the individual? Is it maybe some individuals have a life karma and they're meant to stay stuck, or does even the mild things like mushrooms, without having to go up to ayahuasca,
Yeah.
help us just decide which
For
stuckness
me,
to get out of?
For me, it's like I've gotten really better at accepting my stuckness.
Accepting your stuckness.
Like whether or not I'm going to be not going to be neurotic anymore. Right? I don't think so. I think I'm going to retain my major neuroses, but I'll do a workaround. You know, you can still do a workaround. You can compensate for them. You can be aware of them. It's sort of like physically, we have a body that has limitations, maybe unique to us, right? But we work around those limitations. We find a way to move our body, even though it's not perfect, you know. And I think neurosis is the same way. I'm not anymore trying to get rid of my neurosis. You know, but I don't want it to cripple me either, right? I don't want it to disable me, but I'm not so intent upon changing it anymore. And I think the ayahuasca helped me realize that. You know, but that's not necessary. You know, I don't want to be crippled by it, but I'm always going to be a kind of person that gets their feelings hurt too easily. Wow.
That's just.
I don't know. Is there a connection between that and that? Maybe I should think through this a little bit more. Maybe I should work on this process of getting over my feelings hurt too easily. Yeah. Because that it's sort of, I don't know if that would be just for me though, right? But each person, I guess I figured I've been working so hard to change these certain features of my personality, and I've been unsuccessful. I don't want to devote more time to that. There's other fish to fry, you know. There's other things to do, and I guess I want to do what I can do with the talents I have. So I'm trying to sort of use my energies to go deeper in the areas that seem to be opening for me, right? So I'm sort of following where the opening appears to be. Something like that. That doesn't mean I'm giving up on change. It's just I'm just having a slightly different attitude toward it. Any other questions? Yes.
You were, so you're talking about your observations of women sometimes in the beginning of during the course of psychedelic experience displays ferocity. I just wanted to expand on that. I'm curious about that.
Well, like, you know, I think it's happened 3 times, and the only 3 times, maybe, no, with one, basically it was like kind of a research activity using psilocybin mushrooms. And to try to communicate during the sessions. That was the goal that we had. And we had been working on it, and we were trying to see if we could develop a sort of symbolic language we could use to communicate during the experiences. And we had talked a lot about it, we had planned for it. And we had some success in the first sessions. But then one of the subsequent sessions where it was a stronger session for both of us, the strength of the entheogen brought about this ferocity in the woman I was with, and it just had it was like I guess one framework would be, it was like she encountered, the way she described it, it was like kind of a panther, you know, and it came into her, and she became this panther. She embodied it. And she didn't want to do our research activity anymore. The panther wasn't interested in research. The panther wanted to go outside and run around and roll. The panther wanted to roll. Sorry. Doing all this kind of techno or things happening. So that told me something that I had never. I mean, I've been in sessions with men where they've become ferocious too, but not right at the beginning of a session. That I had never encountered before. And the next time we had the experience, the same thing happened. And then later, working with another woman, the same thing happened. So I'm starting to just think, you know, I don't know this territory. I'm not familiar with this territory. I don't know how common it is for. I mean, we could ask the women in the room, you know, if ferocity is a part of your narrative and when it shows up. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think when we go into the realms that we go into at the beginning of a journey like that, we're going into the dark, we're going into the underworld, and many women, in my experience, contact the Dark Mother there, or contact the Dark Goddess, the Kali energy, and she shows up and has that very fierce sort of aspect that you know, and I think in our culture is very repressed. And so I think that is one of the ways that that energy or that entity, that being, if you will, has an opening in a way to breathe a little bit. And
it's very empowering too, right? Very empowering. And, you know, I suspect that this is true for a good number of women. I don't know for all women or whether it's a temperament thing, but I think it's really there, and I think it's really worth exploring more. You know, I think it's an important question. Because I think typically models of spiritual transformation, I think, are male models. And so it'd be fascinating within this community, you know, if we could generate kind of models that are appropriate to the different, you know, all the differences. It would be really, really interesting. Yes?
Yeah, I think it's, I agree with Megan. I think it connects to that.
We're changing batteries in the microphone, so if you could speak up, please. That would be
I agree with Megan, but I think it connects to very primal archetypal energies, and I think it has to do, it relates to the body as well, and having a womb, and being so close to those mysteries, you know, which I can speak to, having had children.
That doesn't sound like it's on
Right.
It doesn't have to be green. You know, green and stuff.
Oh, it's okay, you can. But I think, you know, having that experience of like talking about, I haven't done ayahuasca and that, and I'm called to do it, but I do a lot of visionary and trance work and that in other ways. But having children and thinking about,
there we go. Now it's working.
Oh, thinking about or talking about like the forces of nature, and then having a child and embodying, like in a very visceral, immediate, and profound way, you know, the forces of nature. And also I had a son who died last year, so now I'm like at that end of it, like, and to hold those things. It's just when you talked about like what was that second stage, or
the tolerating of overwhelming experience.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's like, if you can do that, I mean.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question for you?
Yeah.
Is there a time in the narrative in your journey work where surrender does occur, though?
I think in the past now, like with my son dying, you know, he was 33 and it was sudden. I'm like it's grief, like that's off the scale. So I felt like I went to an underworld kind of thing first. I'm interested in the vertical and the horizontal. Because first, a lot of my moves and dream work and that too are horizontal. Before I go to some new place and do like the world tree kind of thing, you know, dimensional thing.
Yes.
So that there's something there with that. So I forgot what I was saying.
Well, that's good. How about for you? How about for your experience? Do you think there's a surrender aspect to it, another phase for you, or a different?
Oftentimes the surrender is surrendering to the dark goddess who wants to come in,
Okay.
Yeah.
because that she's scary.
Okay.
And then there is a surrender in that to whatever's going to follow, and then once you've experienced that empowerment, there is a
And-
surrender to letting go of the empowerment
So the
into whatever.
empowerment allows anything else to come to be received because there's no fear anymore. So, okay.
Yeah, for me, I can't say I felt like, with this experience, with the grief thing, I haven't felt like, oh, I'm surrendering. But maybe there's surrendering implicit in just by living with it and still trying to, you know, create, like, reconstruct my being in the world and the meaning I give to everything, because everything has changed. And I relate to that, where you have that reflection point. Because when I went to this underworld place, which I'm still sort of in, even as I sit here, I had that moment of clarity. And I saw myself like crouched down and screaming, you know, and calling my son's name. And then all of a sudden I went, wait a second. I said, I'm someplace that you really can't go unless you die yourself, you know, or you have a near-death experience. I thought, in a way, I'm privileged. I said, I'm going to look around. I call it cartography of the liminal. I said, I'm going to look around and see what I can find out, you know, and then if I ever get through it, I'll like share at the end, like you said. Thanks.
Thank you. We're done.
Thank you, Frank Echenhofer. Thank you, Frank, for that nice presentation. So several people have come in since we opened. There are a few things I should have mentioned and did not. For those of you who are not from CIIS, which is most of you, I did not mention that there are a number of altars in the room. These are our Day of the Dead altars. So it's not part of an ERIE function, but we're enjoying their presence. I also wanted to mention that if you picked up a schedule at the front desk, we have discovered that we need to shuffle a couple of our speakers. So whereas it shows Larry Norris going next, we are in fact going to have Indigo Warman speaking next. But there will be a 15-minute intermission here. This is your time to visit the restroom or the cafe, talk amongst yourselves, track down Frank and ask him where you can get more information, things like that. And so in about 15 minutes, 13 minutes, Indigo will begin addressing you, and so there's a brief break right now. Thank you.